Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something most people don't realize until it's too late. Silence is not weakness, it's your power. The moment you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop reaching out, everything shifts. Because when your voice goes quiet, that's when your value gets loud. And the right people, they don't let that silence last. They move, they show up, they feel the difference. This isn't about playing games, this is about finally choosing you. When you decide to stop initiating contact, something powerful begins to happen, not to the other person, but within yourself. Silence is often misunderstood as emptiness or disinterest, when in fact it can be one of the most commanding forms of communication. Choosing not to reach out doesn't make you weak or passive. It shows strength, restraint, and the courage to stop pouring into something that hasn't been reciprocating. You stop chasing answers, stop justifying your value, and start giving your energy to something far more important, your peace. In that silence, you finally give yourself room to breathe. It's the moment you no longer beg for recognition or connection. You allow life to reveal what's truly aligned with you. In every unreturned call or unanswered message, there was a subtle erosion of your self-worth. But when you stop, you take the first step toward healing that erosion. You begin the journey back to your power, and power is silent, never desperate. Your absence becomes a message. It communicates what words never could. When you're no longer filling in the space, when your presence isn't offered freely and without thought, it forces others to confront what they had taken for granted. That absence is not a punishment, it's a boundary. And boundaries aren't barriers, they're invitations to rise, to respect, to recalibrate. What once was constant and predictable suddenly becomes rare and valueless. Blee. The noise of constant effort and endless availability fades, and in that quiet, clarity begins to grow. Silence, used wisely, is a mirror. It reflects back to others how much effort was truly theirs and how much came only from you. The moment you go quiet, those who genuinely care will feel that shift, and those who don't, they'll simply drift, proving they were never rooted in something meaningful. Pulling back often reveals more than pushing forward ever could. You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes you just have to stop speaking, not to punish or control, but to create space. Space for reflection, space for respect to grow. When you stop reaching out, you give others the opportunity to show up, not because they were reminded, but because they chose to. And that choice is everything. Because what you truly want is not someone who's only responsive to your effort, but someone who's intentional with theirs. When you're always initiating, you never get to see their natural rhythm. The silence lets you watch what happens without your input. That's where the truth lives, not in what people say, but in what they do when they think you're not watching. It's easy to confuse action with control, but stepping back isn't giving up control. It's releasing what you were never meant to hold in the first place. You were never meant to carry both sides of the connection, and when you finally put your effort down, you feel how heavy it really was. In that pause, you realize that constant outreach was often just a fear of being forgotten. But the irony is, when you stop chasing, you're no longer forgettable. You become unforgettable, not because you're playing games, but because you've stopped playing small. You reclaim the energy you were pouring outward and begin to redirect it inward. That shift doesn't make you hard or closed, it makes you whole. And when you're whole, you stop settling for being someone's option. The silence isn't a tactic, it's a truth serum. When you step away, what remains is what was real to begin with. You no longer have to wonder what someone would do if you weren't the one holding things together. Now you know. The beauty of this is that you no longer need to chase clarity. It arrives uninvited when you're no longer distorting the picture. Your withdrawal isn't about absence, it's about honesty. It says, I've done my part, now it's your turn. And whatever happens next, you can trust it because it wasn't forced. The responses you receive, or don't, become deeply revealing. You don't have to dissect every message or read between every line. The truth, once you go quiet, becomes loud enough to hear without straining. Letting go of constant communication doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you've started caring about yourself too. Often, the need to always reach out comes from a place of anxiety. If I don't keep the connection alive, it will disappear. But anything that dies without your constant effort was never sustainable. It's not your job to keep relationships alive through sheer willpower. Healthy connections are mutual. They breathe on their own. And when you stop carrying the conversation, you finally get to see whether it ever had two voices. That knowledge is liberating, even if it's painful at first. It gives you something far more valuable than comfort. It gives you truth. And truth is the foundation of anything worth building. This new stillness allows you to return to yourself. You begin to listen to the parts of you that were drowned out by overthinking and overgiving. Your intuition gets louder, your boundaries get clearer. You realize how much noise you were absorbing just to avoid the discomfort of silence. But within that quiet, you find peace that doesn't depend on anyone else. You stop needing replies to feel validated. You stop needing responses to feel seen, because now you're finally seeing yourself again. And when you can sit in silence without reaching for someone else to fill it, you found real power, the power of self-trust, the power of patience, the power of knowing that what's meant for you won't require you to beg. Time and space are not just physical, they are emotional. Taking space isn't just about not sending a text. It's about emotionally stepping back and no longer tying your mood to someone else's behavior. You start to reclaim your mornings, your thoughts, your joy. You stop refreshing messages and start refreshing your spirit. You realize that the attention you were seeking outside of you is something you can actually give to yourself. And in doing so, you raise your standard, not as a form of rejection, but as a reflection of growth. The silence helps you see that love is not proved by pursuit. Real love doesn't need to be chased, it needs to be honored. And anything that can't meet you in that place is not a loss, it's a lesson. Every time you hold back from reaching out, you send a message. Not to anyone else, but to your own soul. The message is, I trust myself. You trust that if the connection is meant, it will rise to meet you. You trust that your worth isn't tied to how often you're acknowledged. You trust that stepping back isn't being forgotten. It's being found by the right people. In this silence, you're not waiting. You're becoming someone who doesn't need to fight for love because you've already found it within. That kind of inner alignment can't be shaken by someone's silence, because now it's your silence that holds the most strength. There's a deep emotional truth most people don't realize. Awareness doesn't come from information, it comes from experience. You can talk, explain, overanalyze and justify your feelings 1,000 different ways, but until someone feels the absence of your presence, nothing really lands. People don't respond to logic the way we hope they do. They respond to emotional impact, the kind that hits quietly, unexpectedly, and often through loss. When you remove your energy, your time, your consistent availability, that shift speaks louder than any conversation ever could. It becomes a moment of reckoning. The comfort they once took for granted is suddenly gone, and comfort when missing is felt like a sharp edge. This isn't about creating pain, it's about revealing the imbalance that was always there. And when that imbalance is felt rather than told, everything starts to change. The need to always explain yourself is exhausting. You try to make others understand your worth, your effort, your love. You write paragraphs when you're hurting, hoping someone will read between the lines. But most people don't really hear you until your silence shows them what life is like without your presence. That emotional vacuum is more powerful than any perfectly crafted message. The reality is that people adapt to comfort quickly. They get used to your good mornings, your check-ins, your constant care. It becomes background noise, warm, reliable, expected. But the moment that music stops playing, the silence is deafening. And that silence delivers a clarity no conversation ever could. It shows what was real and what was routine. It's the emotional pause that reveals who will lean in and who will fade. Emotional connection isn't just built in presence, it's also revealed in absence. When you always reach out, you never give others the chance to decide for themselves. You're unintentionally managing the emotional tone of the relationship, carrying it forward on your own back. And you might do this out of love, habit, or even fear, but it prevents truth from surfacing. Because if someone never has to question your place in their life, they never have to choose it consciously. When you stop filling the space, you allow the natural balance to return. You see what they do with silence, how they respond to stillness. You're no longer narrating the connection, you're watching it unfold. And in that unfolding, you learn something powerful. Truth doesn't need to be forced. It surfaces the moment you stop pushing. There's a difference between being heard and being understood. Often, when you express your needs, people hear the words but miss the message. They respond with temporary changes or empty reassurances, but nothing sticks. That's because change born from pressure is surface level. Real change happens when the loss is felt, not threatened, not discussed, but felt. Emotional consequences wake people up. When they go to reach for what was once easily available and find nothing there, they begin to reflect, not just on the relationship, but on themselves, what they didn't value, what they overlooked, what they assumed would always be there. And that self-confrontation, uncomfortable as it is where growth begins. Not because you asked for it, but because you stopped asking entirely. You can't inspire someone to meet your needs by constantly explaining why they matter. That only creates a cycle of emotional teaching, where you're the student and the teacher in your own relationship. But when you step back, when you let the silence stretch beyond your comfort zone, you create a moment of emotional tension. That tension invites someone to either rise into it or retreat from it. And either way, it gives you clarity. You don't have to wonder anymore whether your worth is seen or your effort is appreciated. You get your answer in action, not intention. In consistency, not promises. In how someone fills the silence, not how they respond to your words. That is where emotional truth lives. Not in talking, but in timing. When you stop initiating, you're not creating confusion. You're removing a crutch. You're taking away the pattern that made it too easy for someone else to stay passive. That decision doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It can be quiet, respectful, and grounded in self-respect. You don't need to announce that you're stepping back. You simply do it. And as the days stretch on, the emotional landscape shifts. You're no longer managing both sides of the connection. You're letting reality do the work. What you're really doing is allowing someone to feel your absence without explanation. And if that absence creates discomfort, then it means you mattered. If it creates nothing, then it means you were only ever carrying it alone. Letting someone feel the loss of your presence isn't cruel, it's honest. It's the kind of honesty that doesn't need confrontation. It allows feelings to reveal themselves organically. That's why silence, though difficult, is often the most effective form of communication. It speaks not only to the other person, but to your own growth. You realize that you don't need to convince anyone of your worth. Your worth speaks for itself in your absence. The love you gave, the effort you made, the energy you poured in, all of it becomes clear the moment it stops. It's not about withholding affection. It's about no longer handing it to someone who hasn't earned it. And that shift changes everything, not just externally, but internally too. Your silence becomes your boundary. It's not a wall, it's a door. It says, I'm no longer doing all the work. If this matters to you, you'll show me. That kind of clarity requires emotional courage. It requires you to sit with discomfort instead of running back into familiar patterns. But the more you stay with it, the more you understand. Love doesn't need to be explained over and over again. Respect doesn't need to be begged for. Real connection doesn't need to be micromanaged. When someone feels the emptiness where your warmth used to be, they either reach for it or they don't. Either way, you win, because you stop living in limbo and start living in truth. The most powerful shifts happen when you stop speaking and start observing. The moment you decide to no longer carry the emotional weight of a connection alone. You begin to notice the patterns that were invisible while you were busy giving. You see who checks in, you see who doesn't, you feel who misses you, not through their words, but through their actions. It's in those moments that you realize communication was never the problem. It was the imbalance, the effort gap. And by stopping, you've created the only condition under which real balance can return: space. Not space as a punishment, but as a mirror, one that reflects the truth back at you clearly and without distortion. Emotional transformation doesn't always happen in conversations. It happens in silence, in the pauses we allow, in the moments we step back and trust that what's meant to stay will show up without being chased. That shift, when you stop reaching out, stop explaining, stop holding things together, isn't passive. It's powerful. It signals a deep internal shift from needing to be chosen to choosing yourself. You no longer try to fix the narrative. You let the story unfold. And in doing so, you give yourself the gift of emotional clarity, not the kind that's given by others, but the kind you uncover when you finally stop running from the silence and realize it's been guiding you all along. Sometimes the most revealing thing you can do is nothing at all. When you step back from a connection that once felt familiar, you allow it the space to either breathe or break. It's in that space where truth shows up. The right kind of presence doesn't shrink in the silence, it rises. If someone truly values what you brought into their life, they will feel that absence deeply, not just out of routine, but because it meant something real to them. Real care doesn't just miss attention, it misses connection. It notices when a presence fades, when a voice goes quiet, when energy no longer arrives uninvited. That noticing turns into thought. That thought turns into action. Because people who care don't let silence stretch, they move through it. Action speaks volumes where words often fall short. The effort someone makes without a prompt is a clear reflection of what lives in their heart. It's easy to respond when something is handed to you, easy to show up when invited, but the real test of care is what happens without the usual cues. Does the absence go ignored, or does it inspire genuine reflection and change? Does the connection fade quietly, or does someone step in to revive it? This moment is the litmus test, one where authentic investment is revealed not through reaction, but initiative. You no longer have to question or guess what your place was. The silence, now uninterrupted by your effort, shows who was only mirroring you and who was truly engaged. Real effort doesn't need reminders, it responds to loss with intention. It's in the stillness that patterns begin to shift. When you stop doing all the emotional lifting, you give someone else the chance to step forward. And if the connection was built on something meaningful, it won't dissolve in the quiet, it will deepen. Someone who values your presence doesn't wait until it's gone to prove it. They show up when it matters most, when things aren't easy, when the usual flow has been interrupted. And in that decision to show up, even in your absence, they demonstrate something powerful: consistency. It's not about grand gestures or dramatic words. It's about noticing the silence and choosing to break it, not because they feel obligated, but because it feels wrong to stay distant. That choice speaks the loudest. Being consistently available can often mask how little effort is coming from the other side. When you're always the first to reach out, to check in, to give love freely, it becomes difficult to see whether the energy is being matched. But when you pull back, not in bitterness, but in clarity, the imbalance becomes visible. You're no longer holding up both ends of the connection, so it either stands or it falls. That's not cruelty, it's honesty. And it's only in that honesty that you can receive what's real, because someone who values you won't need your presence to be constant to feel your importance. They will recognize what's slipping away, and they'll act, not in panic, but with purpose. Their response becomes the answer you've been looking for all along. This is where you learn the difference between attention and affection. Attention often comes easily. People notice what's missing, but they don't always act on it. Affection, however, requires something deeper. It shows up with intention, with consistency, with the willingness to cross the gap in silence. It doesn't wait to be invited back. It chooses to return. When someone chooses to reconnect without being nudged, it reveals not just desire but emotional depth. You no longer have to question whether your presence mattered. It becomes clear in the action someone takes when you're no longer making the first move. That clarity allows you to relax, to stop wondering, to stop chasing. And more than that, it allows you to trust. There's a natural peace that follows when you realize you don't have to work so hard to be remembered. When someone genuinely cares, they remember on their own. They reach out because they want to, not because they've been reminded. They notice the silence and decide it doesn't feel right. That kind of instinctive care can't be faked or forced, it just is. And when it shows up, it brings relief. You feel seen without having to wave your arms. You feel chosen without having to ask. The connection becomes mutual, balanced, and rooted in truth. You stop overthinking every step because you're no longer carrying the weight of the relationship alone. You finally get to just be and be enough. What becomes obvious in your absence is what was always there in your presence, but hard to see. When you're constantly giving, it's easy to mistake reaction for investment. But once you stop, once the flow of effort pauses, you can see the difference between those who were truly connected and those who were simply along for the ride. That contrast is powerful. It's not meant to hurt, it's meant to clarify. Because clarity is freedom. It allows you to stop pouring into places that only reflect you, not return to you. And it allows those who do care to come forward, not because you called them, but because they couldn't stay away. That's the kind of connection worth building. A connection that stands even when you're still. No one should have to beg to be prioritized. That truth becomes unshakable when you stop showing up first and allow someone else the chance to meet you halfway. In that silence, they have a choice, not a demand, not an ultimatum, just a moment to respond. And how they respond tells you everything. It shows whether the connection is something they truly value or something they've grown used to but never really nurtured. It takes courage to step back. It takes even more courage to stay there until the right response comes. But that's where self-respect lives, in the space between effort and expectation. It's where you learn that you're not asking for too much, you were just asking the wrong person. Effort that comes uninvited is the most genuine kind. It means someone isn't acting out of guilt, fear, or pressure. They're acting from within. That kind of effort is what builds lasting trust. It tells you this isn't about keeping up appearances. This isn't about obligation. It's about care that's rooted in choice. When someone chooses to bridge the silence, to lean in rather than drift away, it's because they see your value with or without your reminders. That level of recognition is the foundation for something real. And when it shows up, you'll feel it. Not as a performance, but as presence. A presence that doesn't fade, just be us. 'Cause yours did momentarily. You don't have to force the right energy to return. You only have to create the space to see whether it was ever real. When the noise fades, when the effort pauses, when the rhythm changes, the truth finally surfaces. And the ones who care deeply don't let you stay in the dark. They light the way back with action, with effort, with initiative, not because you asked, not because you hinted, but because they felt it and they couldn't ignore it. That kind of response doesn't just affirm your worth, it aligns with it. And once you experience that, you'll never again settle for anything less than someone who meets you in the quiet and speaks with action. Choosing to pull back is not about strategy, it's about clarity. There comes a moment when you stop trying to explain, prove, or earn connection, and instead you let your silence do the talking. It's not because you're being distant or cold, but because you've realized that constantly showing up without being met halfway is draining your energy. You're not withdrawing to create confusion. You're stepping away to find peace. This shift isn't about control, it's about self-respect. It's the quiet recognition that your worth should never depend on how loudly you express it. By saying less, you're not hiding your feelings, you're honoring them. You're giving yourself space to see the truth more clearly. And in that space, you find out what remains when you're no longer holding everything together. There's a freedom that comes when you no longer feel responsible for maintaining every thread of a connection. You realize that pulling back doesn't make you less loving, it makes you more honest. Honest about how much effort you've been giving. Honest about how often your heart has spoken without being heard. And when you finally go silent, it's not a game, it's a boundary. It's a moment where you stop proving and start observing. What happens when you're no longer the one reaching out? That answer is the most revealing truth of all, not because it tells you what others think, but because it shows you what you've been allowing. And once you see that clearly, everything begins to change. You don't owe your constant effort to anyone who hasn't shown they value it. That's not selfish, it's self-aware. For too long, you may have believed that love means always showing up no matter what. But love without reciprocity becomes a performance, not a partnership. When you stop rehearsing the role of the one who always cares more, you start returning to yourself. You begin to ask different questions, not how can I fix this, but is this even mine to fix? And in that question lies a deeper kind of wisdom, the kind that doesn't chase but chooses, the kind that says, I deserve effort too, not because you're hard to love, but because your love shouldn't be one-sided. There is a profound kind of strength in restraint. Not everyone understands that silence isn't avoidance, it's alignment. It's choosing to step back when your heart wants to rush in because you finally value your peace over temporary comfort. It's realizing that forcing connection never creates it, it only postpones the truth. And truth has a way of surfacing when you allow space. When you no longer explain, persuade, or plead, you invite honesty into the room. That honesty may hurt at first, but it also heals. Because what's real will remain, and what isn't will fall away. Your silence becomes your filter, not to punish others, but to protect your spirit. To give yourself what you've been giving everyone else: attention, care, and space to feel. When you stop contacting someone, it's not because you've stopped caring, it's because you've started caring differently. You've shifted from proving your worth to preserving it. That change might not be understood by others, but it's not meant for them. It's meant for you. It's a moment of choosing grow with over-validation. Instead of reaching out, you reach inward. Instead of explaining your value, you embody it. You no longer need to be heard to feel whole. You begin to listen to your intuition, the quiet voice that's been telling you that you deserve mutual energy. And when you listen, you begin to heal, not from rejection, but from the habit of abandoning yourself for the comfort of others. Silence is not a wall, it's a window. It doesn't shut others out, it lets truth in. It reveals who checks in and who checks out, who notices the shift and who keeps moving. And in that noticing, you begin to gather real data, not from what people say, but from what they do. You're no longer lost in speculation. You're grounded in reality. You stop clinging to potential and start seeing patterns. And those patterns guide you, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. Because when you stop chasing connection, the only ones that remain are the ones who are genuinely meant to. That's not loneliness, it's alignment. People often confuse silence with withdrawal, but it's actually a form of emotional presence. It says, I'm here, but I'm no longer offering what wasn't appreciated. It's not about ghosting, it's about grounding. Grounding yourself in your value, grounding yourself in your truth. You've spent so long trying to keep something alive, often at the cost of your own well-being. But now you're choosing a different kind of love, a self-directed one, the kind that no longer fears distance because you understand that anything real doesn't need to be forced. You finally get to breathe. And in that breath, you remember who you were before you forgot your needs in the pursuit of someone else's approval. Letting go of constant communication is not the same as closing your heart. You're not giving up. You're letting things unfold without your interference. That's a powerful shift. It's the certain. You move from force to flow, from expectation to observation. And what you see in that stillness is the truth you were too busy to notice. That maybe the connection was never balanced,